Vietnam War, a historic war in American history. Fought in the 60s and 70s, the Vietnam War started because of the U.S. policy of containment, stopping the spread of communism. The war is famous for many reasons, like the precedents it set. For example, Vietnam War was the first war to use Agent Orange as a biochemical weapon. In addition, it was the first militaristic defeat of the United States in history thus far. But most importantly, the Vietnam War was the first war that was televised. This means that the American populace saw war for what it was for the first time. Because of this, the myths of the glory of war were dispelled. Opposition to the war was then greater than any other war in American history. Tonight, we'll be examining just what kinds of oppositions the Vietnam War faced in Topics in 10 Minutes. I'm joined now by Vietnamese farmer Kim Ngoc, who was living in southern Vietnam during the war. Kim, what can you tell me about the nature of the opposition to the war in Vietnam itself?
Most of the opposition that was seen was to the Diem regime prior to the war. In 1956, he refused to hold free elections against Ho Chi Minh, whom it was believed would have won the election. This caused the Viet Cong, a guerrilla group, to form in South Vietnam. They fought against the oppressive laws of the Diem regime. Then, in 1963, he made anti-Buddhist laws that prohibited celebrating Buddha's birthday. This began huge rallies, protests, hunger strikes, and self-immolation throughout the South. Then, later in 1963, U.S. troops moved into South Vietnam and began using tactics such as Agent Orange and bombs that destroyed the peasants' farms and their communities. We, as the peasants themselves, we could not do anything to resist this, but the Viet Cong and the National Liberation Front, who were supported by the North, they could help us. So we had them in our homes, we gave them hospitality, and in return, they fought the devilish Americans.
Kim, thank you for your time.
As the war continued during the late 1960s, many college students started a radical peace movement in opposition to the Vietnam War. Students were also opposed to the draft issued in 1965, which excluded students enrolled in higher levels of education in order to keep the influential members of the middle class. Students protested against this conscription because they viewed it as an attack on the individual's decision to fight for their own country, while some who had been called to the draft burned their draft cards. The Students for a Democratic Society was a leftist group that led many of the events during this period.
Using our company's patented time machine, I've managed to travel back in time to visit Samantha Eakes, who's a grad student at Kent State, who was there during the Kent State Massacre. She's writing her research paper now on the Kent State Massacre and has kindly enough told me that she will speak with me on what happened in Kent State. So, Miss Eakes, where were you on the day of the Kent State Massacre?
Well, it was Monday, May 4th, 1970, and I had just gotten out of my philosophy class, and I knew that a lot of people were going to head to the Commons because the protest had been planned 3 days earlier for noon that day. So I started to head over there to see if people would actually go, considering that the university itself had sent out 12,000 leaflets banning the event. So I wasn't really sure if anyone was going to show up and if it was even worth my time, but I started to head over there, and when I got there, I saw that 2,000 of the students had gathered and were waiting for the first speaker.
So, did you join in the protest at all?
Well, I was very kind of hesitant to join in, considering hearing about a lot of the other protests that were going on at other campuses and how the police had forcefully removed the students that were protesting at Columbia. So I was kind of really scared to actually join in. But when I thought about it, I was so angry that Nixon had sent the troops into Cambodia, and after the My Lai massacre, I just decided that it was way more important to stand up for kind of what the students were protesting against the government at the time, so I just joined in.
So, what else happened after that in the rest of the day?
Well, as some of the speakers started to go on, and noon came closer, a lot of the Ohio Army National Guard had come over to to try to disperse the crowd, and it wasn't really working at all, and they eventually started using methods like tear gas. Especially Harold Rice was one of the guard members. I just really remember just being there and being very forceful, but luckily they kind of had no effect on us because of the wind, so we started chanting at them, "Get the pigs off campus," and we were just really riled up to stand up to them.
So did the guards continue their efforts to disperse the student populace?
Yeah, they did, and it became very immoral and extremely violent. I was horrified at the events that happened next, and a lot of the students around me were just, you could tell, were really, really affected by what was going on. The National Guard, they had bayonets on the end of their rifles, and they started coming towards us, and I kind of started to run. I left the Commons. A lot of people did stay, though, at the actual Commons, and after a while we started hearing gunshots, and we saw that the National Guard had opened fire on some of the students that were there. I think some of the stats that I had researched said that within 13 seconds there was 67 rounds of ammunition that were fired, and 4 students, including one of my best friends at the time, Allison B. Krause, was killed, and over 16 others were wounded. So it just really was, I ran and I just kind of started crying. I couldn't believe that this kind of thing was happening.
Thank you for your time, Zeke.
Thank you.
I'm joined now by student activist, herbalist extraordinaire, and musician Jen Berry, again using our company's patented time machine. Jen, how did you get started with the whole music thing, and how do you keep up with it?
I think it all started when me and my friends graduated high school, and a few years after that we all drove up to New York for Woodstock, and this was back in '66, and we camped out for like 4 days, and it was just amazing. Whether it was raining, we would get covered in mud, whatever. Everybody was just there because everyone loved music and they wanted to see all these performers, and it was just the best 4 days of my life.
Okay. Who are some of the favorite performers you saw at Woodstock?
There were a lot of good ones. Joan Baez was great. Jefferson Airplane. The Who, they had a really good one. They came on at like 4 in the morning, and I think they had 25 songs in their set, and they played Tommy, and it was just really cool. But hands down, I gotta go with Jimi Hendrix. He was just outstanding.
Yeah, Jimmy is quite the musician. Speaking of him, what are your thoughts on his controversy involving the Star-Spangled Banner, as well as the anti-war message that most of his songs carry?
Well, besides being a huge fan of his music and everything that he plays, I really like his stance on the war, just because he was in the Army himself for about a year. He was a paratrooper, and he loves his country just as much as the next guy, but he understands that we need to get out of this war and we need to stop all this bloodshed. And that definitely comes out in his music, where like the song Machine Gun, it sounds like you're actually on the battlefront. It's such a powerful song, and like his rendition of the Star-Spangled Banner was just great, and I just love all of his work.
Who are some other influential people, do you think, that sort of, bring across that anti-war message with their music?
Bob Dylan is a big one. He came out with These Times They Are Changing, Blowing in the Wind. He's another, he's trying to get people to see what's going on there and to actually do something about it. Pete Seeger, he's another big one. The Doors, they have a really good show I saw a few months ago where in the middle of the song Unknown Soldier, they have this firing squad kind of routine where Jim Morrison pretends to get shot and falls to the ground, and it was really cool. They're definitely apparent in their anti-war beliefs.
Alright, so what do you think of the uniqueness of the Vietnam War as its role in the media spotlight?
Well, this is definitely a unique war in that it's all over the media, and television has become so popular now, and just every time you turn it on, there's something about the war, and it's for the first time people can see what's going on there, and it actually affects them, and now it's becoming so clear how this war is basically going nowhere, and we're not going to come out winning, basically. We just need to stop all this violence.
Alright, thank you for your time. 1968, things looked good for the Vietnam War. American troops were surging forward, and the war seemed to be coming to a close. As many military officials said, there was a light at the end of the tunnel. However, January 31st, 1968, the Tet Offensive began, with the NLF forces invaded South Vietnam, capturing many cities. This dealt a blow to U.S. support for the Vietnam War because people really didn't believe this whole light at the end of the tunnel theory anymore. 1 year later, the My Lai massacre became public in America, and Americans started being villainized and seen as the aggressors in the war. Because of this, the accumulation of opposition to the war reached a peak, and in 1973, American forces began to withdraw from southern Vietnam and Saigon, and by 1975, the southern Vietnamese forces had lost and the containment had failed. This concludes tonight's episode. See you next time.